أنا عندي حل شيخ طه. Bismillah. The brothers who want to listen, if they can come closer, or the ones who are talking, if they can leave. Inshallah. Okay, inshallah, I'm just fixing something. So just give me one quick moment, please. اوكي. انا عندي حل شيخ طه. سأعطيك لينك لجميع الناس ينزلوا. لا، انا اعطيه اللينك لجميع الناس ينزل العرض على الجوال. كل واحد ينزل العرض. العرض على العرض. مش العقد، العرض. الباوربوينت. I uploaded it. They can download it inshallah. So السلام عليكم everybody. نبدأ. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, sallallahu ala rasulillah wa sahbihi ajma'in. The PowerPoint presentation, if you'd like to download it, go to the following link. Take out your phone if you want to follow along. Take out your phone if you want to follow along. And download the following link. Open Google, open anything. bit.ly, bit.ly, /HP ICSD. HP, History of Palestine, ICSD. bit.ly, HP ICSD. bit.ly, HP ICSD. That's the PowerPoint presentation, inshallah, okay? Does anybody need it again? bit.ly, /HP ICSD. History of Palestine, ICSD. خلاص? If somebody doesn't know it, go to someone that knows it and he'll show you inshallah. / right here, HP ICSD. خلاص, there you go. Did you guys get it? You got the PowerPoint? خلاص, we start inshallah. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم صل على حبيبنا ونبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في الأولين وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على حبيبنا ونبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في الآخرين. اللهم صل على حبيبنا ونبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم كلما ذكره ذاكر أبرار وكلما غفل عن ذكر الغافلون. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. وآتينا موسى الكتاب وجعلناه هدى لبني إسرائيل ألا تتخذوا من دوني وكيلا ذرية من حملنا مع نوح إنه كان عبدا شكورا وقضينا إلى بني إسرائيل في الكتاب لتفسدن في الأرض مرتين ولتعلن علوا كبيرا فإذا جاء وعد أولاهما بعثنا عليكم عبادا لنا أولي بأس شديد فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا ثم رددنا لكم الكرة عليهم وأمددناكم بأموال وبنين وجعلناكم أكثر نفيرا إن أحسنتم أحسنتم لأنفسكم وإن أسأتم فلها فإذا جاء وعد الآخرة ليسوءوا وجوهكم وليدخلوا المسجد كما دخلوه أول مرة وليتبروا ما علوا تتبيرا. All praise due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows what we reveal and knows what we conceal and even knows what the animals feel. We thank Him, we praise Him, and on Him we have reliance. It is to Him we only turn to for true guidance. We ask Him to send His peace, His blessings, His mercy on the best of human beings and prophets Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, on whom be praised until the very end of our days. And we ask Him for steadfastness, guidance, to relieve Palestine from oppression and Masjid al-Aqsa from occupation, and to never lead us astray, and for Him to save us all on Judgment Day. Say Ameen. So the ayat that we recited marks to you how important Palestine and Masjid al-Aqsa is, as it's engraved into the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the ayat in Surah Al-Isra, glory be to the one who made His servant travel by night from Masjid al-Haram in Mecca to the furthest Masjid, Masjid al-Aqsa in Palestine, whose surroundings we have blessed. It has been blessed because this land is known in the Quran and known among the people of knowledge and known among the prophets as the land of prophets, Ardul Anbiya. Many prophets came there and spoke to people the faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted all of humanity to follow. So this is where we start, is that in reality, Islam, one of the greatest claims that it makes is that Allah, our Lord and Creator, sent only one faith to humanity. One faith. Believe in God, don't attribute partners to Him. So in reality, everything that has come after that from prophets and messengers are those who preach this one faith. And that is to submit to the will of God, which is what Islam means. So that's something you have to keep in mind constantly. And of course, pluralism, dialogue with others like Christians and Jews and whoever, that this is what we believe in, that all of the prophets came with one message, to believe in one Lord God. And hence why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this place as a place of pilgrimage and a place of spiritual journey. To this day, it marks as a place of pilgrimage for the Christians and other people of faith, that they go to the Holy Land. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the authentic hadith that let no one take a spiritual journey, meaning a journey intending for religious purposes, for purification, to come nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a religious journey, except to three places: Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, my masjid, meaning Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina, and Masjid al-Aqsa in Palestine. So it is akin to being like a pilgrimage. Why? The hadith in Sunan ibn Majah that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam he reported as saying that Sulaiman ibn Dawood, Sulaiman the son of the prophet, the son of a prophet, Solomon the son of David, alayhim salam, when he finished building Masjid al-Aqsa, he made three du'as, three prayers. The first one is hukm yusadif hukmahu, to give him a rule which is in alignment with what Allah wants, with His will, with God's will, so that His judgment is alongside God's judgment. The second, mulk, a kingship which will not be given to anyone other than Him. And lastly, that no one comes to this masjid, meaning Masjid al-Aqsa, that wishes to pray there, prays there, except that they return back to where they came from, like the day their mother gave birth to them, free of sin. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah granted him the first two, and I hope that He grants him the third. So just like Hajj, like we know, when you go to Mecca and you finish your Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ says, the ones that go back and they have not ruined their Hajj, they have not argued, they have not done indecency and lewdness, then they will be sinless like the day that their mother gave birth to them. Hence why these three journeys are so important, and why this masjid is so important. That anyone prays there, they will be free of sin, insha'Allah ta'ala. And of course, we believe that as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was asked, he was asked, what was the first masjid? What was the first place of worship of Allah, the Almighty, the Creator? Where was it built? What was the first place? And he said, Masjid al-Haram, the Kaaba, right? Was the first place that was built for the worship of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Then he said, then which one? Then he's in Masjid al-Aqsa. So he said, between that was how much, how many years? He said 40 years. So in Islamic tradition and history, we believe that the first place of worship was the Kaaba, the second was Masjid al-Aqsa. Who built it? The scholars differ. Some say the angels, some say Adam and his progeny. And the view that's closer is the angels built it first. So you understand that this place of worship has been a place of worship since the beginning, the dawn of human beings. And hence why, when we as Muslims believe that this is another place of worship for the worship of the one God, one faith that He sent to humanity, hence where their history starts from very, very long time ago. So what we're going to do, inshallah ta'ala, in this presentation is discuss this entire issue in three separate time periods, inshallah, the limited time that we have, bid'Allah azza wa jal. And that is going to be how the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned this place and its historical significance during the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then in the Islamic period until the Ottomans and the Ottoman rule. And then from the Ottoman rule's end until today. So inshallah, in this short time period. One of the most important things that we need to understand is why this is so important. Malcolm X, rahimahullah, he spoke about this. He said, education is an important element in the struggle for human rights. It is the means to help our children and our people rediscover their identity and thereby increase their self-respect. Education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs only to the people who prepare for it today. If you don't know your past, your history, you won't know where you're going. So this issue of Palestine is not just an emotional issue. This issue of Palestine is a historical issue. And every Muslim sitting here and every Muslim in the world must know the history. Otherwise, where are you planning? What are you planning towards, in essence? And that's why Malcolm X himself, he removed his last name, and he's known as Malcolm X. He says, why? Because I don't want to be known as the name of the colonizer, the slave owner, essentially, that gave birth to our family lineage and legacy. And we follow that slave owner. You understand? He says, no, our legacy goes beyond that. It is lost. Hence why he said Malcolm X. And his name changed again when he became Orthodox Muslim and went to Hajj. So he called himself Malik al-Shabaz. SubhanAllah. And how important those things, your history is so important to you, to the identity, to the name that you have. Hence why this is an entirely important topic for us, inshallah, to discuss. That's why one of the leaders of the civil rights movement in America, known as W.B. Du Bois and also Marcus Garvey, they were the originators of the thought of the civil rights of Martin Luther King, everybody. He said something very importantly. He says the problem with us, meaning as African Americans living in this society, is that we see ourselves through double consciousness. He says this idea that you look at the world through the eyes of the other. Why? Because you live in this society, so you're going to look at yourself through the eyes of who? Of the predominant society. So he said this double consciousness must be dealt with. You have to see yourself through your own eyes, through your own tradition, through your own history. Otherwise, you're always going to see yourself as inferior. This is what Ibn Khaldun even mentioned. So in any case, this is why it is so important to understand our history, for us to understand whose shadow are you walking in, and whose tradition do you come from. And this is an extremely important aspect. So we already mentioned the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regards to the hadith relating to Masjid al-Aqsa. If you continue during the slide, you will see a picture of the complex of 14 hectares of Masjid al-Aqsa. Masjid al-Aqsa is not the golden domed masjid, neither is it the silver domed masjid. Okay, Masjid al-Aqsa is the entire compound, 14 hectares. That is Masjid al-Aqsa. And for you to understand the event that was mentioned in the Quran, known as Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the night journey, the Prophet Muhammad was transported by night from Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa on a miraculous journey. It's narrated by 22 Sahaba. It happened by body and in physical nature. Okay? It's not just a dream, like some people now are spreading nonsense. It's a physical event. He came here and he led. Where did he lead the prayer? Where the silver the dome is. That's the mihrab. The Prophet ﷺ prayed there and he led the prophets in prayer in this exact location. So that's why when you go here, there's not a place except that a prophet has made sajda. And that's why it's significant. It's a significant place. And the Prophet ﷺ was then mi'raj, meaning he was elevated to the heavens from this blessed place. Some say he was elevated from the Dome of the Rock, hence why they built the masjid on there. There's no historical significance to that, other than this is Islam's oldest building. The oldest architectural building in the Islamic world is this building. Architecturally, it was built in 691. So that means it's an extremely old building. It's been obviously renovated here and there, but the actual building structure, it's the oldest architectural Islamic building in the Islamic world. And it is said, of course, that the Prophet may have risen to heaven from the rock itself. This is a historical report. So again, it is the entire compound. The entire compound of Masjid al-Aqsa. Not the silver dome and not the golden dome. The entire thing. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, of course, spoke about the dua that we mentioned. He said that a prayer is multiplied in Mecca by 100,000 times. A prayer in my masjid, meaning in Medina, is multiplied 1,000 times. And a prayer in the masjid of Bayt al-Maqdis is multiplied 500 times. In another narration, 1,000 times. So it's multiplied by, again, praying there. Another tradition that mentions how Palestine will be a Muslim land and how Islam will spread there happened in the 5th year of Hijrah. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sieged because the Jewish tribes of Medina broke a covenant with him. They were citizens of the city, they broke the treaty with him. They broke the covenant with him. They committed treason. They went to the Quraysh and they joined forces with the enemies of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Arabs of the surrounding Arabia. And they massed an army which was 3 times larger than the army of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They had 10,000 soldiers, and the Prophet ﷺ had only 3,000. They sieged the city from all sides. They cut off their food, they cut off their supplies, they cut off everything that they had. Sound familiar to you? Doesn't it sound like what was happening to Gaza? It's very peculiar how in that situation, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned something very interesting. They were malnourished. They tied rocks to their stomachs. And the only thing that they had, you will see a picture on the map, that they could only dig a trench to protect themselves. The roughly population of Medina at that time was 10 to 12,000. That means the enemy forces roughly brought a soldier for every man, woman, and child. They wanted to kill them all, slaughter them. And the Prophet had only 3,000 to defend. So he asked consultation from his companions what they should do. And Salman al-Farisi said, in Persia, when we got afraid from our enemy in this way, in siege, we dug a trench. So they dug a trench, and this is why this is known as the Battle of the Trench, and the Battle of the Ahzab, when the armies amassed against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. For an entire month they sieged him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And they went through hunger, and not knowing what's going on, what's going to happen. And the Muslims went through so much fear and hardship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in an entire surah of the Quran for us to reflect on. Surah Al-Ahzab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ زَاغَتِ الْأَبْصَارُ وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرُ وَتَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ الظُّنُونَ. When the eyes went back in terror over what's happening, and their hearts reached their throats out of fear, and people started to have internal conversations. Are we all going to die now? Am I going to lose my family? Is everything going to end? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُنَالِكَ أُبْتُلِيَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَزُلْزِلُوا زِلْزَالًا شَدِيدًا. There, the believers were shaken heavily in their bodies, in their hearts, in their iman, in everything, in their consciousness. And this was a great test for them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says two amazing things. He says there's two responses only in these times. The munafiqeen and the believers. There's no other third. The munafiqeen, what do? They look at everything materialistically. It was all your fault. You should have done a treaty. You went against all of this. You're going to get us killed. And what do? They turn their backs on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. إِلَى يَوْمِنَا هَذَا. And what do the believers do? They saw the armies amass against them. They had the fears. They had this trepidation. They had this sense of real difficult consciousness that they had to overcome. And what did Allah do? Allah made their hearts firm because of one thing. They said, هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. This is what Allah and His Messenger promised us. What do they mean by that? And He said, Allah and His Messenger are truthful. What do they mean by that? My brothers, my sisters, our faith did not promise us prosperity gospel. You become Muslim, all of a sudden, you're going to get a $2 million check at your house. Your life is going to become cushy. It's all about your house and your car. It's all about trying to marry the ideal person. This life is temporal. You will spend it some days, then you will go on for account for the hereafter. This is probably the only lasting bastion of reality being given to humanity, that you're going to be held accountable. That's what they believed in. This life is temporal. Tomorrow's victory. Either Jannah or we will overcome. وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Allah's messenger were truthful. That's what made their hearts firm. The greatest claim, among the greatest claims that Islam makes, is that there's a hereafter. The permanence of the next life. We're starting to forget this. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ says, أَكْثِرُوا. Increase the reminder of the thing that destroys your pleasures. This reality. Guess who hasn't forgotten it? Gaza has not forgotten it. Palestine has never forgotten it. People there live and they know what's happening. And if there's one thing you can benefit from in this moment, is the same situation the Prophet ﷺ is going through. And they went through. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet ﷺ something amazing. He's the one who told them to dig the trench in this moment. And He directed them in the digging. They dug for 15 straight days, 24/7. In shifts, 2 shifts. They came across a giant boulder. The Prophet ﷺ was told, Ya Rasulullah, there's a giant boulder, we don't know what to do. You're the one who told us to dig this way. So he said, where is it? Show it to me. So they showed it to him. And by the way, it is still here. It's still in Medina. This boulder, remnants of it, is still in Medina. So it was in the way of the trench. So he said, give me the axe. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. In the name of Allah, Allah is the greatest. He struck the boulder. When he struck the boulder, 1/3 of the boulder fell. And from where he struck, light illuminated and covered him and the companions. And he saw a vision through that light. And he said, Allahu Akbar, Utitu mafatih Sham. Allahu Akbar, I've been given the keys to Palestine. I've been given the keys to Syria, to Lebanon, to Jordan, the Sham, Levant. I swear by Allah, I can see from this place where I stand the red castles of the Byzantine Roman Empire. And everyone is like amazed. In a time when this is the most difficult moment in probably the Prophet's history, of how they're being attacked from such a severe way, he believes in a vision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him, a prophecy and a miracle. Everybody's amazed. Then he strikes it again, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. 2nd, 3rd falls of the boulder. A light illuminates from there, and he sees a vision through that light, and he says, Allahu Akbar, Utitu mafatih Faris. Allahu Akbar, I've been given the keys to Persia. I swear by Allah, I can see from where I stand the entrance to the white castles in the city of kings, Madain Salih. Madain, excuse me, not Madain Salih. Madain. Then he strikes it a 3rd time, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and the last 3rd falls. A light illuminates from there, surrounds him. And he says, Allahu Akbar, Utitu mafatih al-Yaman. Allahu Akbar, I've been given keys to the Yemen. I swear by Allah, I can see from the place where I stand the gates of Sana'a, of the Himyari kingdom. The scholars, they mention about this event that the Prophet ﷺ is seeing a vision of where the light of Islam will touch. Ibn Kathir follows this up with conversation. He says, when the Prophet ﷺ specified these lands like Sham, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, as the land where the light of the Prophet ﷺ is spread, is a sign that Islam would be established and firmly rooted until the day of judgment. These will be lands of Islam and Muslims. And there might be short periods where they might not be, and they might be taken, or they might go through struggle, but they will last until the day of judgment. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said that Sham will be a place of Islam and its people. And in the end of times, where Isa, the son of Mary, will descend in Damascus by the eastern minaret, as one of the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when Jesus comes back. It has been mentioned by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Bukhari and Muslim for this reason, that there's going to be a group from my nation who will perseveringly be steadfast, triumphing on the truth. Those who abandon them or oppose them will never harm them until Allah's command comes, either victory or the final day. And Mu'adh radiallahu anhu said, they will be in Sham, in Palestine, in Syria, in Lebanon, Jordan. This is by the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Meaning what? We have been told everything by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Everything has been told by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in prophecy. And this also teaches us something very important and powerful. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw 3 visions, did he not? 2 out of those 3 visions he didn't even see. He passed away alayhi salatu wasalam. He did not see Islam spread to Palestine, to these areas in Syria. He did not see Islam spread to Persia. He only saw Islam when the people from Yemen came in the 9th year Hijrah. 4 years later, they came and accepted Islam, and he says, they're the people of Yemen. Al-Imanu Yamani wal-Hikmatu Yamaniya. The last 2 he did never see. So I want you to understand something. The Prophet ﷺ, in the most difficult of times, under siege and occupation, he believed in a vision he himself did not see. Do we believe that now while the brothers and sisters are going through occupation and siege in Gaza or Palestine? Do we believe in this vision of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? You should. That's what should give you strength. The analogy is absolutely mind-blowing. How the Prophet ﷺ was going through similar situation, and yet he gave them hope, subhanAllah. And this is why we continue the Muslim history thereafter. The Muslim history thereafter was, as the Prophet ﷺ passed to the highest companionship in the 11th year of Hijrah, 4 years thereafter, the Muslims stood at a battle in the 16th year Hijrah, known as the Battle of Yarmouk. In this battle, the Muslims had 80,000 soldiers, and they were facing the Roman Byzantines at 120 to 160,000. They were outnumbered. This is one of the most pivotal events in human history. If the Muslims lose this battle, they will forever lose these territories. And the Roman Byzantine Empire may pose as a threat again to come and attack the Muslim Empire. So in this battle, Mu'adh ibn Jabal is told to speak to these 80,000 Muslim soldiers. And what does he say to them? He says to them, Ya Ahl al-Quran, O people of the Quran, O people who were sent to guard the book, O helpers of guidance and supporters of truth. Allah's mercy and His paradise are not achieved through wishful thinking. Allah's mercy and His paradise are not achieved through wishful thinking. I hope, I pray, I may. This is not how Allah's mercy and His Jannah are achieved. But rather, He gives His forgiveness and His vast mercy only on those who are sadiqeen, who are truthful. And they confirm their sidq with action, with amal salih. Have you not heard Allah promising us in the Quran? In Surah An-Noor, Surah number 24, ayah number 55. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. Allah has promised those among you who do 2 things, 2 conditions. Number 1, you believe, and you show the truthfulness of that belief with amal salih, with righteous actions. What will He give you? He will make them successors, leaders on the land. And He will give this leadership to them like He did to those before them. And He will make their deen firmly rooted, they will worship me and none beside me. He said this to them. Then he said to them the following advices. He said, be shy of your Lord by not having him seeing you flee from your enemy, when all the while you are in his grasp. You're not in the grasp of bombs made in the West from planes that are being dropped over your heads. You're not in the grasp of those who claim to be your occupiers or those committing genocide. You're only under the grasp of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you have no one to seek refuge in except in him, and when you have no honor except without him. So go and defend your faith. This was the speech of Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu right before the battle of Yarmouk. For 6 days they fought, they won this battle. They won the battle. This opened up the siege of Palestine that happened 2 months later. And they came at the doors of Bayt al-Maqdis. Bayt al-Maqdis is the name of Jerusalem. We don't say Jerusalem because Jerusalem is not the name for that city for us. We say either Bayt al-Maqdis or Quds. So they sieged the city and they surrendered. They said, we'll give the keys to the leader of the Muslims. Amr ibn al-As was the general at that time. He said, I'm the leader of the Muslims. So Sophronius, the patriarch of the city from the Christians, he looked at him and said, you don't look like a leader to us. Send us your leader. So they sent a letter to Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who happened to be in Syria at that time. They asked him to come. He asked consultation. He finally came. And he came not with 50,000, not with 2,000. He came with one servant, sharing one animal to ride. And he said to his servant, it's oppression if we both ride the animal. We have to take turns. They don't even want to commit oppression against an animal. So they get to near the city, the entrance to the city, and it's the servant's turn to ride. So the servant says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, O leader of the Muslims, why don't you just get on the animal because you're the leader, you should be walking in. He says, no, it's oppression against you. It's your turn to ride, you will ride. So he takes the reins of the animal and he goes down the riverbed across to get to the entrances of the holy city. And his entire clothes becomes muddy. As he enters, the entire city of Christians and patriarch and the 4 generals of the Muslims in the nicest clothes and the nicest horses, and they're looking at the leader of the Muslims muddied with an animal and a servant, riding his animal. So Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu comes and says, yeah, I mean, when you want to get comfortable, you want to change? He says, no, I'm good. So he says to him, yeah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm afraid that people will not give you the honor that you deserve. Meaning what? Because he wants him to look at the status of so Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, look at Abu Ubaidah. لو قال هذا غيرك. I wish someone other than you said this, Abu Ubaidah. Why? Because he's a companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, كنا قوم ذلة فعزنا الله بالإسلام ولما طلبنا العزة في غيره أذلنا الله. We used to be a humiliated people, but Allah honored us with Islam. And when we seek an honor in other than it, Allah will humiliate us again. Look at us today. And he walked past Abu Ubaidah. He went into the church, which is in the presentation, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is it is the most sacred church in all of Christianity. They believe that Jesus died here and resurrected, all that. So that's where they held the terms for surrender. Sophronius saw in this man something he had not seen before in all of the conquerors in the history of humanity of this land. Everyone burned it to the ground and pillaged and killed the people except this man. This was the most merciful conquest. And he signed a pact known as the Umari covenant, which is on the next slide. And he says to him the following among the things he says. Umar ibn al-Khattab gives assurance of safety for themselves, for their property, for their churches, for their crosses, for the sick and healthy of the city. For all the rituals which belong to their religion. Their churches will not be inhabited by Muslims, and they will not be destroyed. Neither they nor the land on which they stand. Islam does not believe in usurping and taking people out of their homes and violently disrupting them without any due right and haqq. Neither they nor the land on which they stand, nor their cross, again, nor their property will be damaged. They will not be forcibly converted, and no Jew shall inhabit the city, something the Christians insisted on. Why? Prior to the Muslims' arrival and the conquest, the Jews had an insurrection against the Christians and they killed 60 to 70,000 of them. So they actually kicked all of the Jews out and they insisted for the Muslims not to allow them in. So they made Umar al-Khattab sign this pact, the Christians did. So he said he agrees. Shortly thereafter, guess what? As this pact was being finished and they signed it, they said to him, as a sign of peace, you can pray here. And he said, I rather not. Because I know if I pray here, the Muslims will want to come take it and make it a masjid. So he said, I'll pray outside. So he goes outside, he walks 25 feet. Go to the next slide. He prays there, and guess what? He was right. We built a masjid on top of that. So there's a masjid right across Christianity's holiest church, right across from it 25 feet, known as the Masjid of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, where they have this covenant on the wall in the stone. And this is why, later thereon, you know what Umar radiallahu anhu did? He re-invited the Jews to inhabit and live in Quds like they used to. This is the first mark of history that we need to kind of focus on. Anyone who says this is about being anti-Semitic or the Muslims being anti-Semitic in any way, or being anti-Jewish in any way, this is a laughable joke. In the history of humanity, it has been the Muslims and the Muslim empire who has continuously allowed and harbored and refuged and lived in peace with Jews primarily, and of course Christians and others. This is the first example of that. You will see others inshallah. Thereafter, 1,300 years of Muslim rule of Palestine and Bayt al-Maqdis began, with certain periods of it being lost after the Christian society in Europe decided to launch a crusade in 1095 by Pope Urban II against the Holy Land. And now the reason for that is to consolidate their division. The church was very deeply divided in East and West church. So they wanted to create an essential campaign that would bring all the Christians together. The first crusade, guess who was it against? Not even a single Muslim. It was against the Jews. The first crusade, they killed 2,000 Jews. Do you know why? In Europe, they viewed Jews in a bigoted way. They severely disliked them, and they had kicked them out and forced them to migrate to so many different societies. There was bigotry against the Jews to the nature that they became second-class citizens in many places and were ghettoized. They would not be allowed to work and essentially be given any kind of privilege. So what happened? Many of them became those who loan money and deal with interest, because the rest of the society didn't like that. So the Jewish community, those who dealt with that, obviously became wealthy off of the interest. So what happened is they increased taxes on them. So what did they do? They increased their interest. They increased the taxes, they increased the interest. And this behavior led to the Christian community realizing that the best way to get rid of this problem is to just kill them. So that's exactly what they did. The first crusade was actually against the Jews. Then thereafter, they took the Holy Land from Muslims by coming and raping and pillaging and decimating the Muslim villages to the ground and forcefully taking the Holy Lands and Bayt al-Maqdis. This would last for 80 plus years. Not a single adhan was given in Masjid al-Aqsa. A cross was put on the Dome of the Rock. And Masjid al-Qibali, the silver domed masjid, was used as a pig and horse stable. To this day, when you visit it, and you see on the pillars, on the very bottom of the pillars in Marwani, there are hooks for where they used to tie the horses. 88 years, not a single adhan was given. And in that case, it continued until a man by the name of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi came, who was Kurdish in origin, rose among the ranks, took care of Egypt first, and brought it into the Muslim rule against the Fatimid rule of the Shia, who were collaborating with the Crusaders. Then he took Syria and put that under his rule. And then he united the Muslims under one cause, which is to take care of the siege of the Holy Land. And on July 4th, 1187, he defeated them at the Battle of Hittin, the July 4th of Islam, if you want to say it. But anyway, right? On July 4th, 1187, he defeated them at the battle known as the Battle of Hittin, which is one of the most pivotal battles also in human history. And then he sieged Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem. That siege, he offered them to surrender, and he would not harm them like they harmed the Muslims. He would not kill them like they killed them. And they accepted that. And they even made a Hollywood movie about this entire thing called Kingdom of Heaven. Go watch it. And that was known as the second merciful conquest of the Muslims, where he didn't decimate and annihilate everybody in the city like those who previously came to that. So this moment marks the re-establishment of the Muslim rule. One of the most important things about this, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi celebrated, alhamdulillah. When he passed away, you know what happened? 3 of his nephews came and they started to have a conflict with each other over who the next sultan, the next leader of the Muslims would be. And one of them, known as Al-Hakim, and he wasn't, a'udhu billah minhu, you know what he did? He went to the Franks and he said, I give you the keys to Bayt al-Maqdis and Palestine and this area if you join me to fight my cousins. So 90 years of the blood, sweat, tears, and shuhada, the martyrs, was sold out by one of the nephews of Salah ad-Din. So that he could gain what? Power and his own rule. Alhamdulillah, they got rid of that. But 500 Franks walked into Bayt al-Maqdis scot-free because of this man. And this marks to you another problem. The history of the Muslim world has declined because of 2 main reasons. Number 1, masalih shakhsiyah. Individual benefits of people who want to rule their power, their strength, their family, their money. And number 2, internal fragmentation. When Muslims fight among one another, because my language is better than your language, my tribe is better than your tribe, my fulan is better than illan, and all of that. My biryani on this side of the river is better than your biryani on the other side of the river, right? My couscous in this country is better than your couscous in that country. All these problems, okay? And then number 3 is decadence, luxury, which makes them lose sight of responsibility. What is the problem? That's exactly verbatim what the Prophet Muhammad said. There will come a time when your enemies will swarm over you like over a piece of a plate and food, over a platter. And they will say, Ya Rasulullah, will we be few in number then? That's why they're attacking us? He says, no, you will be plenty in number, but you will be so insignificant like the foam on top of the ocean. Can the foam do anything? No. He said, why, Ya Rasulullah? They said, love of dunya, love of materialism, luxury, forgetting the hereafter. It's just a far-reaching thing. Inshallah, Allah Ghafoor Rahim, wishful thinking. And karahiyat al-maut, hating to die. So Aisha one day asked the Prophet, Ya Rasul, doesn't anyone hate to die? He said, that's not what it's meant. What's meant is that a person lives according to the tenets of this faith, where when the time of death comes, they love to meet their Lord. They don't think of, oh my God, my sins are going to destroy me. And when the time comes, they hate to meet God, so God hates to meet them. Allah Jalla wa Ala. So from this moment, just to teach you, subhanAllah, after all of that hardship, there's still people that sold the Muslim world. From the family of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. Yes, from the family of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. But alhamdulillah, the Muslims recovered it. And the Muslims started again the following rule from 1250 to 1517 under the Mamluks. The Mamluks ruled, and they expanded, and they built, and they had and they lived under Islamic rule and no problem. Until the Ottomans beat the Mamluk, overthrew their dynasty, and essentially took over, conquered Egypt and conquered the lands, and they became the Khulafa after that. And that marked then 400 more years of Muslim rule under the Ottomans, from 1517 until 1917, 400 exact years. And during that time, in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue and was led by a Muslim cartographer, nobody tells you the rest of the poem. The guy who led Christopher Columbus to America was a Muslim. Okay, in that same year, Muslim Spain fell. Muslim Spain fell. After hundreds of years of rule, the Spaniards came and took over Spain from Muslims and executed and committed genocide against them all, burned them to the ground. There's entire villages that used to have castles and When you go there in Spain, there's a valley. What's this valley? There used to be a city here because they burned it to the ground. And what do? They killed Muslims and they killed Jews. The Spaniards killed Muslims and Jews. What did the Muslims do? Sultan Bayezid made an Ottoman proclamation as the Khalifa that all Jews will be welcomed in the Ottoman lands. 150,000 of them were welcomed in Ottoman territory as officially Ottoman citizens. And they were given refuge. Where? In Palestine, in Syria, and the rest of the Ottoman lands. And they were brought by ships, and there's a picture of that in the presentation. This is the second time that Muslims in human history, the ones I'm presenting, there's other examples of that. This is the third time actually, the one with Salah ad-Din that gave everybody access to the city, of harboring and living amongst the Jewish community, the Christian community. This does not have anything to do with anti-Semitism. And this lasted, of course, until the 19th century. So in 1878, there was a record done of how many people lived in, what was the percentage of people that lived in Palestine. 87% were Muslim at that time, 10% were Christian, and only 3% were Jews. They all lived equally and lived peacefully together, to where Christians even attended Islamic schools, and Muslims attended Christian functions. And they lived in this harmony together, to the extent that the next slide, there's a guy named Wasif Jawahiri, who was a Christian musician, who memorized part of the Quran, because he went to Islamic school and Ottoman schools. This is recorded. In 1898, something happened in Europe which affected pretty much the world thereafter. A sense of nationalism began to spread, where people started to identify with German being German, Austrian being Austrian. And the Jewish people themselves also found themselves as people without a homeland, and also essentially being kicked out of Europe from every place that they went to. So the sense of having a homeland from themselves started in the 1860s, known as Zionism. This idea did not mean that they wanted to necessarily go to the Holy Land, Palestine, a homeland, anywhere. In fact, some of the places where they even thought up later was Uganda, Madagascar, places in South America, until finally the idea became galvanized by a man named Theodore Herzl, who was born in 1860. But also, the term Palestinian became popular in the Ottoman Empire around this time as well. The actual identity of Palestinian. That's why you will see maps of Palestine and references to being Palestine as people started to attribute themselves to some kind of nationality, even within the land. And that's why the first three people, it's mentioned here in the slide, Khalil Badis, Najib Nassar, and Salim Qubayyan, in 1902 and in 1898, they referred to themselves as Palestinian. It's recorded that way. So European Jews also started to come to Palestine. In the Russian Empire, why did the European Jews start to come? Who can tell me? I already mentioned it. Why? Why did European Jews start to come to Palestine? Yeah, they were not welcomed in Europe. So they went to do Jewish migration to Palestine. There's actually a poster from the Zionist conference says Jewish migration to Palestine. I have it. In Russia, they started to now mass murder them and have pogroms against the Jews. And that's why 1 million Jews left Eastern Europe for the United States. Europe did not welcome Jews, did not treat them equally. And a number of which, in the thousands, settled in Palestine as well. But where did the majority go? To America and other places. This is the discussion now of Theodor Herzl, who essentially was the leader of the current idea of Zionism, who developed the idea of a homeland and wanted it to be where? In Palestine. And there's a number of events that happened that led him to do this. So the Jewish migration went to 25 to 30,000 Jews by 1903. They migrated to Ottoman Syria, which included Palestine. Now, when they arrived there, something happened. And that is that they started to buy the land under Jewish unions, Zionist unions that wanted Zionists to become landowners. From now on, you will hear me use the word Zionist, not Jew. Okay? There's a reason for that. Because this has nothing to do with Judaism at this point. Zionists started to buy land from the Ottomans. The Ottomans privatized the land and they allowed them to buy. Another example of this is not anti-Semitic. They allowed the Zionists to buy the land. Why? Because you and anyone else who wants to buy land and has the money, Bismillah, give me your money, we got the land. The Arabs at that time were tenants of the land and they were farmers. Why did they did not own the land as much as the Ottomans did? Because the Ottomans also made it incumbent that any Muslim that owned land would have to go to the Ottoman draft and army. So many of them were tenants to the Ottoman lands. So when the Zionists started to buy those lands from the Ottomans, many tenants were then forcefully displaced by the Zionists as they made colonies for themselves. You guys understand this? So what happened? Altercations happened. In 1886, Petah Tikva is one of the places where essentially Zionists started having altercations with the Arabs at that time, and these altercations were known as settler land disputes that started to escalate. As more Zionists came and more land was trying to be bought, displaced of the Arabs happened. They started to become essentially racist towards Arabs, and Zionist labor unions started to refuse to employ Arabs, refused to go to Ottoman schools, refused to essentially be a part and parcel of the society in many ways. And more of these altercations between the Arabs and the Zionists essentially happened. So for the next 30 years, Arabs sold their lands to Zionists and got into land altercations. Ottomans privatized the land ownerships, and Arabs were tenants, not owners. Zionists started to buy more land, displacing Palestinians, and started fighting. Until even one of the leaders of the Palestinians, by the name of Yusuf al-Khalidi, he sends a letter to Herzl himself, and he says, leave Palestine alone, stop this. What does Herzl do? Herzl continues, of course, and he directly speaks to the Ottoman Sultan in three different discussions. Sultan Abdul Hamid, okay, the second. And what he does is he says to him, I want to buy the land right for Zionists. So he refuses him 3 times. Finally, in 1901, he sees him personally. And he says to him the following things. He says, I will give you the consolidation of Ottoman debt to the tune of 20 million pounds, equaled now to $2.2 billion, which will be 20% of the Ottoman debt. Abdul Hamid rejects him and saying, even if you paid me the weight of the earth in gold, I would never agree. I would never bring shame upon Muslims. If you want to buy Palestine, know that the price is the blood of all Muslims. I have no enemies other than the enemies of Islam and Muslims. He refused it to him straightforward. So what do they have to do? They had to now focus on working on another solution towards getting this piece of land. 1908, another 40,000 Jews arrived in Palestine. They're working as a large project under the Zionist Congress, using the wealth of businessmen, using the wealth of others who can bring Jews to Palestine by essentially bringing young, healthy, single socialist Zionists who didn't try to learn the local language. Most didn't go to Ottoman schools. Many refused to hire or employ Palestinians. Arabs. Instead, the plan was to revive a heritage language Hebrew, build Jewish socialist utopia, and these people were from Europe, were Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, Germans, Italians, all claiming they were nations. They had the right to national independence in their own homeland. Why? Because this is what Europe is doing. Okay? Palestinians started then now create unions as well and asking for trusts to save land from Zionist control. So that they needed to buy and galvanize more of their land from what the Zionists were essentially doing. So Zionists in Europe are sending more Zionists to Palestine to populate it, trying to do anything to gain more land. Now what happens is a small little backdrop. In 1757, the South Asian colonialism started when the Bengal was taken from the Sultanate power to what's known as company rule. The East India Company pillages the Bengal, takes all of its resources, now they want to rule it. Just some of it was not enough, so they wanted to rule it. They got into an altercation and a battle known as the Battle of Plassey, killing the leader of the Bengal, the Sultan, his name was Siraj ad-Dawla, by paying off one of his generals known as, what? Who was Bengali here? Mir Jafar, right? They took that from him, offered him money, and made him sold out the Sultan. And the Sultan collapses. This starts the colonialism of Asia. revolts become suppressed. And this leads the entire Muslim world to slowly become colonized. All of Asia is lost by the 1890s, exactly this time. All of Asia becomes colonized. All of Africa is gone, for the most part. So the Muslim world has become now products of colonialism from all ends. And the Ottoman Empire has become known as the sick man of Europe. Why? Because it's so big it can't run itself. So much luxury made them lose sight of responsibility. Most of the country's resources became imported. So all of it essentially was based on them owing people loans. Their only ally was Germany, who they tried to essentially consolidate some of their loans with. And what happens by that time? 1914 comes around and Germany gets to decide in the World War. The Ottoman Sultan at that time did not want to enter the war because of all of these reasons. His own pashas were not trustworthy. Some of them only cared for their own benefit. And two of the pashas forced the Sultan to enter into the Holy War, literally. They called it the Holy War. Why? It was their holy war for benefit. And it was the Minister of War and another pasha. They convinced Sultan Mehmed V to enter the war and to announce global jihad. This was the last time global jihad was called by a Khalifa, and basically nothing happened. Because the Muslim world was so weak. It was literally being colonized by every single aspect of it. And essentially what happens is in 1915, the following year, the Allies invade Istanbul. And a battle happens known as the Battle of Gallipoli, which lasts from February 17th to January 9th of the following year, 1916. 150,000 people die. And there was one general, Ottoman general at that time, who essentially thwarts off the Ally attack and defends it from falling completely. A guy by the name of Mustafa Kemal. What is his other name? Ataturk. The guy who would later become the first leader of the People's Republic of Turkey. He takes out the adhan, he removes Arabic from the curriculum. He literally says the whole problem is because we're not essentially becoming more Turk as we are, and that's why he's celebrated to this day. Because he's the general that stopped this attack from essentially taking over all of Turkey at that time. And he did others as well. But I just want to give you an idea of how much history has to play. What happens in the same year, 3 years before the end of the World War, the British and the French with the Russians get together in a secret agreement with two guys named Sykes and Picot. And they say, hey, when the Ottomans are done with, let's figure out a plan of how we're going to divide the land. So they draw a map. The map is on the presentation. And they make a line, and they say, hey, A is for you, the French. B is for us, the British. And A would become the French mandate of the Middle East, and B would become the British mandate. And the French include what? Lebanon and Syria. And the British include Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq. 3 years before the war would even end, they're already strategizing. It doesn't end there. In July, meaning just 2 months later, the British Foreign Office starts a correspondence with the leaders of Mecca and Medina, known as the Ashraf, led by a guy named Sharif Hussein ibn Ali, the 40th descendant of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was the leader of those two holy lands, the sacred lands, under the Ottomans. And they make them an offer. And they said, hey, aren't you Arabs supposed to be the leaders? Why are you allowing the Turks to lead? And they're like, yeah, you're right. What do we get? And they said, we promise that you will become the leader of the Muslims, you become the Khalifa, and we will give you the leadership of the surrounding lands when we take it from them. You have to be against the Ottomans with us. They become a British protectorate. From that moment on, in that following year, they start giving Sharif Hussein ibn Ali 4.3 million pounds until 1920. 200,000 pounds in arms and a stipend of 5,000 to 8,000 pounds a month to commit treachery against the Ottomans. So this was known as the McMahon Hussein correspondence. I'll read you to the end of that because it's literally there in the presentation. I am convinced that this declaration will assure you beyond all possible doubt of the sympathy of Great Britain towards the aspirations of her friends, the Arabs, and will result in a firm and lasting alliance, the immediate results of which will be the expulsion of the Turks from the Arab countries and the freeing of the Arab peoples from the Turkish yoke, which so many years has pressed heavily upon them. This is literally the correspondence. That was the agreement between Sharif Hussein ibn Ali and the Ottomans. That's not it. The following 2 months later, that was in October, 2 months later, William Shakespeare, no, not that William Shakespeare, a British officer by the name of William Shakespeare starts a correspondence with Abdulaziz Al Saud that will make the tribe set of the Saudi family a British protectorate, and will then agree that the Abdulaziz Al Saud will not enter into World War I with the Ottomans. He will not. And they don't agree on what happens with the Ashraf. Why? Because Abdulaziz Al Saud essentially wants control over the Arabian Peninsula. So he never said, I'm not going to touch the Ashraf. They're like, whatever, as long as you agree with you don't enter the World War. You guys understand what's happening here? They're paying two sides. They start paying Abdulaziz Al Saud 5,000 to 8,000 pounds a month after this. It's written, the Treaty of Darren. In November of 1917, the Zionist lobby becomes so powerful that they influence some of the richest and some of also the political heads of Britain to try to give them this promise of what they now know of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that Britain will get the mandate of Palestine under their hands. They wanted the pie. So they start to talk to some of the people that they could within the political spectrum. The prime minister had a discussion with his cabinet, and guess what? The only Jew in that cabinet disagreed, refused initially. So what do? They then influenced a Jewish business banking mogul known as Rothschild. Their banks exist to this day, okay? And his companies were used to produce weapons and military equipment for the British. So I guess the entire British government owed him one. So essentially he used that influence to say, we are requesting from the Zionists, essentially, to give that British mandate of Palestine a promise of the Jewish homeland for them to return to and to build. And that was agreed upon with Arthur Balfour, who negotiated that deal, and Lloyd George, who happened to be a Christian, with the idea that if we did this, this would become a means for Jesus to come back, because the Holy Land should be given to the children of Israel for them to establish a kingdom. Along these lines, these weren't publicly said, but essentially they agreed for this. So this is the letter that was given from the Foreign Office to Lord Rothschild, and November 2nd, 1917, public was the Balfour Declaration, that this land will be given to the Zionists as a homeland. Thereafter, the following things happen. In 1917, the Saudis start the fight with Sharif Hussein ibn Ali. The British Protectorate fights the British Protectorate, okay? And in that same year, in December 9th, Bayt al-Maqdis was sieged and is taken from the Ottoman control. I will play for you what happened then, but essentially, after 40 days and 40 nights of sieging Palestine and sieging Bayt al-Maqdis, the 18,000 soldiers that died made the Ottoman Turks essentially pull out of the city, and 400 years of Ottoman rule end. And the British mandate of Palestine starts. And they walk into the city and they take it, and they said, we promise we will not do any kind of reversing and harm to the people, and that's complete garbage and nonsense, because that's exactly what started the whole mess that we are in today. December 9th, 1917. Anyway, there's more discussion after that, but we have to keep moving. In 1918, October 30th, this is the armistice of the Ottoman Empire essentially took place, where they surrendered and they gave up, and this is the beginning of the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire starts. November 11th, 1918 was the end of World War I. You'll see a picture of the map of where all of the Muslim lands essentially are colonized, and by who and who's controlling them. The vast amount of pink is, of course, British. 1919, so the World War is now over. So what does Sharif Hussein ibn Ali do? He's fighting elements of Abdulaziz Al Saud, but his main concern is what? The leadership of the Muslim world that he was promised. He gets upset because he hears about the Balfour Declaration of Palestine being given to whom? The Zionists, as a homeland. So he starts having problems with the Europeans and the Allies, saying, I'm not going to sign your treaties. He sends his son, who's pictured on the slide, with their best friend T.E. Lawrence, who negotiated all of this. And they attend the Paris conference where all the leaders of those countries essentially will be chosen and decided upon and ratified in different treaties. So in the following years, you will have the following. I will get to it. How the different sons of Sharif Hussein became the leaders of the Muslim world that we have today. You will see this. That same year, America sends a commission report to study this entire thing. They sent two guys named King and Crane to study for an entire year, talk to actual Arabs living there. Hey, what do you think about the Balfour Declaration? What do you think about them taking control? 85% of the people that they surveyed said this is a horrible idea. Only 5.7% agreed to it. And guess what America went with? Hey, I think the 5.7% have an idea. In this report, they said the following: for a national home for the Jewish people is not equivalent to making Palestine into a Jewish state. Do you understand what this means? A national home for the Jewish people is not equivalent to making Palestine into a Jewish state. Nor can the erection of such a Jewish state be accomplished without the gravest trespass upon the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. The fact came out repeatedly in the Commission's conference with Jewish representatives that the Zionists look forward to practically complete dispossession of the present non-Jewish inhabitants of Palestine by various forms of purchases, etc. This was presented to U.S. Congress and it was presented to the United Nations. The original policies of many of the American politicians was this was a bad idea. This was American foreign policy at one point. Why don't we go back to that? It's in the King-Crane Commission report. You can read the entire thing online. Published on August 28, 1919, and even presented in the New York Times. The following picture is now a slide of what the modern Middle East looks like, with, of course, the Al Saud family and the family of Sharif Hussein ibn Ali. So his son, Abdullah I, was appointed the king of the Hashemite Emirate of Transjordan, which exists today as Jordan. His great-great-great-grandson is King Abdullah II. His other son, Ali, was appointed as the king of Hijaz. And his other son, Faisal, was appointed as the king of the Hashemite kingdom of Syria. The Syrian National Assembly were like, who are you? Why are you even here? They kicked him out. So he's like, I still want a country. So they say, okay, fine, you're now the ruler of the Hashemite kingdom of Iraq. He lived and he died. Thereafter, his great-grandson Faisal essentially ruled until 1958. And that son, there was a military coup of the Iraqis against him. Military generals committed a coup d'etat. They went into the royal palace, took out him and his entire family, executed all of them. And the Hashemite kingdom of Iraq ended by a military coup. There was a soldier that fought in that military coup. His name was Saddam Hussein. He eventually would become the leader of Iraq in 1968. And the rest is history of what you know about Iraq. Okay? And Jordan exists to this day based on the King Abdullah II being the certain king. And what happens to King Ali of Hijaz? Abdulaziz Al Saud comes and attacks on December 1925, takes the rule of the Hijaz, Mecca, Medina, in this area, and he becomes the de facto king of this entire land that will be then announced as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in the 1930s. Okay? In 1920, the League of Nations of Palestine made a population report of what the population was. 700,000 was the population of Medina in 1920. 80% were Muslim. A small portion were Bedouin Arabs. 77,000 were Christian not and speaking Arabic. And the Jews numbered 76,000. Almost all had entered Palestine during the previous 40 years. In 1929, the arguments that essentially were the land disputes, that is essentially disposition of the Arabs and Palestinians, ended in what referred to as the Palestine riots. They started to attack and kill one another, a large percentage died, and the British were now fearful why that happened. So they made a report and they realized, oh, it was because we're the ones that gave this land and we're the ones that brought them in immigration. So it was due to three reasons. Jewish labor unions and agencies hired only Jews. British policy created Zionism and mass influx of immigration to people to there, which dispossessed people, caused disputes, and that Zionist behavior essentially created conflict with the Arabs. The Arabs fought back, and because of the land disputes, created this huge mess, which now becomes Zionist versus Arabs. So British report concluded, we need to cut back Zionist immigration. Guess what they did? They increased Zionist immigration. They increased Zionist immigration. By 1930, 1/3 of the population of Palestine was Zionist. And it was exacerbated to something even more that would happen, known as World War II and the Holocaust. In 1936, Jews wanted to move to Palestine due to the Holocaust. 60 million people died in World War II. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, as is widely reported. So there's a map of the increased Zionist immigration to Palestine based on this. So you'll see them in ships in mass numbers coming now into Palestine because of what happened in Europe and what the Holocaust essentially facilitated. In 1936, the Arabs revolted, known as the Arab Revolt, and lasted until 1939. It was a bid for independence following the killing of Qassam, a Muslim activist, and the leader of the Zionists, Ben Gurion, admitted that the Arabs feared increasing Jewish economic power, mass Jewish immigration, and fear of British support for Zionism, and they massacred entire Arab villages. To the tune of 19,792 Arabs were killed. And the insurrection was violently put down. The revolt was unsuccessful, but caused the British to essentially wane their support for Zionist militias, and also to cut back the military support as well as the immigration to only 10,000 per year. The Zionists thought that this was a turnaround from their policy, so guess what they did? They attacked the British. They blew up the King David Hotel in 1946, which was the center of the British compound rule, etc. And they started to amass militias, which would later become the army of the country of the occupied state, known as Israel. So 1947, because of this huge mess, they're being attacked by Arabs, now they're being attacked by Zionists. British are like, you know what, we're spread thin after World War II as well, we're done with this. So the British withdrew from Palestine and give this entire problem to the United Nations to solve, which just had recently been formed. So in 1947, when the British did that, they announced the following things in the United Nations. Jewish population in Palestine was 30%, and they owned only 6% of the land. So the United Nations, they said, announced, do you guys get this idea? They own 6% of the land, they're 30% of the population. What did the United Nations announce? They announced a plan that there should be a two-state solution, a state for the Zionists and a state for the Arabs, where 55% of the land goes to the Zionists. And they only own 6% of the land now, and they're 30% of the population. So what did the Arabs do? What do you think they did? They rejected this. United Nations Resolution 181 on the proposal of what the Palestine issue should be solved by. They were like, y'all are crazy. Why should we even give this up to begin with? 55% to the Zionists as well. This is nonsensical. So guess what? They rejected it, and the Zionists took this as an opportunity. They accepted it as a means of what? We'll accept it, and then we'll still continue to do what we're doing, violently displacing people, dispossessing them. So they announced on May 14, 1948, the country known as Israel. Okay? The Jewish state, according to them, would be the Zionist state, and essentially took large swaths of the land, much more so than even the United Nations had said so. And they mobilized their militias now as an army, and what Ben Gurion, the leader, would refer to as Plan Dalit, Plan D, to violently displace the Palestinians, create defensible borders, remove Palestinians in the way, and declare a Jewish state. And Zionists started to conquer Palestine town by town by gunpoint. Whoever refused were killed. So they expelled hundreds of thousands of people, and this was referred to as the Nakba, the catastrophe. Among the things that happened during this time was massacres like the one at Deir Yassin. The British actually did a report on Deir Yassin. I published the report findings literally on the PowerPoint. It says, the deaths of some 250 Arabs, men and women and children, which occurred during this attack, took place in circumstances of great savagery. This is the British saying this. Women and children were stripped, lined up, photographed, and then slaughtered by automatic firing, and survivors have told of even more incredible other problems. Now, if we had the PowerPoint projection, I would play a video of the soldiers who fought in that massacre. The Israeli soldiers, the Zionist soldiers. where they are laughing about committing murder. And one of them is asked, how many have you killed? He said, I don't know. I had a round of 250 and I emptied it on all of them. These are the old men left from that attack from 1948. So when this is literally mentioned as a catastrophe by them violently taking them out by gunpoint, this is literally what happened. 750 to 800,000 Palestinians were internally displaced from Palestine. Now look where they went. They went 280,000 into the West Bank, 190,000 to 200,000 in Gaza. And this announcement of their country marked the war known as the 1948 war, which lasted for 1 year, where the surrounding Arab states attacked them and they lost the war. What eventually happened at the end of that war, which will be found thereafter, is that Egypt takes Gaza and occupies Gaza, and Jordan takes the West Bank. So whoever's in the West Bank gets Jordanian citizenship, including the 70,000 that essentially went to Jordan as refugees. But Egypt does not give the Gazans citizenship. And this marks the catastrophe of them being enclosed in this concentration camp space without any kind of attribution to any land other than Palestine. So what happens to them? They're going to be used as a critical case study in the rest of our discussion, inshallah. 78% of Palestine was taken by the Zionists. 78%. With 3/4 of the population of Palestine was gone, to the point that now 1 out of every 3 refugees in the world is a Palestinian. And of course, it marks the end of the Ottoman rule. In 1949, Israel had 78% of the land. 200,000 refugees were housed in the Gaza Strip. We'll talk about them now. 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was founded by Yasser Arafat. It was designated as a terrorist organization until 1993. Then America removed that designation when they said we're going to basically vow off violence. But they essentially fought the Zionist, governments in every possible form of violence. Until this led to the 1967 war. The surrounding Arab states wanted to surprise attack the Zionist state, and essentially it is widely believed that someone sold out and tipped them off the day before the attack. So they attacked preemptively and decimated the surrounding countries, destroyed the Egyptian Air Force, took the Suez Canal as occupied it, and everyone was harmed except one country, Jordan. So it's widely believed the Jordanians are the one that sold out. Widely believed. It's not something that's a hard fact, but it's pretty much what everybody understands. So, that how can they know everybody in them if surprisingly you're not invaded? Interesting. So that war lasts for 6 days. That's how quickly they decimated the surrounding countries. Anyway, 1978 to 1979, peace treaties between Israel and Egypt occur, the Zionist state. And in reality, that marks the beginning of the problem we see today for Gaza. You know who's blockading Gaza? Egypt is. You know who's not allowing refugees to come into their country? Only 6,000 refugees were allowed from Gaza in the initial Nakba. Egypt is. Egypt is the one that's creating half of the problem here and the surrounding states, with complete intelligence sharing with the Zionists. In 1982, they invade Lebanon. The Zionist state invades Lebanon. The following picture is a picture of what happens to Palestine as the years move on. So the 1967 borders are again completely obliterate the idea of what Palestine was. To what we have today, settlements, Zionist settlements are then now announced throughout the Palestinian territory, to the reality that there is actually not a real Palestine anymore. They're literally villages, Palestinian villages, with military zones around them, if you see on the last section of the map to this day. We have to go through quickly because we were past time, inshallah, over what Gaza as a case study happens from 1967 until today. Israel implemented the Zionist country implemented a military regime over Gaza, suffocating investment, industry, entrepreneurship. You were not allowed a permit to visit your friends, family, or anything if they're outside of Gaza. They created zones exclusively for Israeli fishing vessels, preventing Gazan fishermen from competing with Israel's industry, forbade Palestinians from selling fish inside Israel. They rendered planting of new citrus trees, replacing old non-productive ones, or planting other fruit trees without permission illegal. You're not allowed to plant. You're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to be in any kind of economic advantage over Israelis. It took sometimes 5+ years to get a permit to plant a citrus tree. This is with the source. Zachary Foster did a PhD on this. So Israel shut down Arab financial institutions. They shrunk the economic base, prohibited Palestinians in Gaza from making critical improvements to the sewage system. By the 1990s, in Gaza City, as much as 50% of all piped water was lost as a result of damage of the pipes because they are not allowing them permits to build their own land. And this exists in Masjid al-Aqsa to this day. If you go to Masjid al-Aqsa, on the left side is a huge garbage dump of construction material. Like, why is this happening? They're not allowed permits to fix the masjid. For a very long time. Even though the masjid is under whose control? Jordanian Awqaf. As a result of all these efforts to suffocate Gaza's economy, less land was under cultivation in 1987 than was in 1947, meaning land was lost completely because of this lack of cultivation. The Zionist state rejected almost every request for family unification between Palestinians in Israel and Palestinians in Gaza. Palestinians in the occupied territories could apply for family reunification for a first-degree relative who had become a refugee after the 1967 war, except for people under the ages of 16 and 60. I mean, this is like a literal joke. The whole thing, in a short term, became a concentration camp and an open-air prison. Okay? This, of course, led to tensions on the rise. From 1977 to 1981, there were 500 Palestinian disturbances as marked by the Zionists, meaning protests. In 1982 to 1987, there's 3,000 protests. Underlying causes, Palestinian workers in Israel reported constant verbal, physical abuse in the workplace, including being cheated out of wages, forced to work under inhumane conditions. They created an apartheid state of dual class, not citizens. They cannot be citizens. Do you understand that the idea that Israel is the greatest or the only democracy in the Middle East is a farce and lie? Because they cannot have the Arabs become equal citizens in that country. Why? Overnight, half of the country would become Palestinian controlled. And this is a Zionist state for the Zionists. It's not for the Arabs or for the Muslims. So this is why this idea does not make any sense. They want the land, they don't want the people. So the idea is to remove, by whatever concession, whatever it takes for Arabs not to live there anymore. The polling data in 1986 showed that the following percentage of Palestinians in the occupied territories indicated that they or the member of their immediate family experienced the following: 47.5% political arrest, 50.7%, half of them were beat, physical abuse or threats, 55% harassment or direct insults at Israeli military checkpoints. 22, meaning almost a quarter, were property or land confiscations, and so on and so forth. The whole thing is based on sources, and you can check it for yourself. So this kind of living literally in a prison, concentration camp-like setting, of course, creates what's happened later as the uprising, the first uprising, known as the First Intifada in 1987. It's a series of violence that erupts from the response of the Palestinians to the occupation of the Zionists, and what's called disproportionate response. For every Palestinian that's killed, 3 Palestinians are supposed to be killed. 10, 11, now 186 to 200. In 1987, the creation of Hamas is made. Hamas was a charity organization that worked for grassroots in all of Gaza, and also giving some kind of educational component. They become very famous. That leads all the way till 2000s, where they become a political entity. And they also become a militarized wing, which essentially fights off with the PLO in various operations against the Zionists. In 1988, the declaration of an independent state of Palestine is done by the PLO. So we discussed mainly what that led to. So all this violence led to America trying to broker a peace deal known as the Oslo Accords, 1993 to 1995. Yasser Arafat unilaterally basically agrees to recognize the Zionist state. Hamas was not allowed to be there. A number of the other Palestinian resistance movements were not allowed to be there. They essentially were not part of the process, other than the fact that Yasser Arafat spoke for the Palestinian people, and he renounced nonviolence, and hence why the Zionists agreed to recognizing the PLO as the Palestinian Authority of the Palestinian rule, and to some idea of a two-state solution, which half of it was completely not agreed upon. The Zionists never followed through with any of that, in any case. The results, disaster. Occupation doubled. Their settler population after this went from 100,000 to 200,000. They increased the apartheid system. They created bypass roads which only Zionists can use. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You cannot walk on this road because you're not Zionist. Hundreds killed in bus bombings and retaliation and violence from the different militant groups. Yes, that occurred. In 1994, they built an illegal separation wall to complete separate entities between what's known as the Zionist state and the Palestinian cities. And this led to the second intifada, the second revolution in 2000, and lasted to 2005. Again, more violence, more people in prisons, more dispossession, more disproportionate response, and all kinds of things. And of course, violence breeds more violence. This led to the Zionists agreeing that they need to pull out of Gaza. So they pulled out their settlers in Gaza, and they allowed the Gazans apparently to have their own elections. And in 2006, they democratically elect Hamas. And in 2006 to 2014, we have a continuous retaliation between Hamas and the Palestinians, or the Palestinians in the West Bank and the occupied territories. And this can be mapped out based on the rockets being fired, response militarily to the occupation, and then the claim that the country essentially does not want to justify the existence of the Zionist state, so hence the Zionist state responds with the disproportionate amount of civilian deaths until we end up to this day right now. Since November 6, 10,581 civilians have been killed. Half of them have been children. 2,411 are under the rubble. 1.5 million people have been displaced. Over 50% of Gaza has been flattened. 191 hospital workers have been killed. 37 to 40 journalists have been killed in Gaza. I mean, I think the United Nations says over 60 of their own workers have been killed. If you were to believe the lie that this is not a genocide, that means that there has to be a Hamas tunnel through the entire of the Gaza Strip for them to flatten entire cities. If you look at simple images, which I've presented here, of the different districts in Gaza, they are literally carpet bombed. This idea that people are being used as human shields or whatever is a disguise to literally just kill indiscriminately. It is literally shown through images. Anyone with a brain just needs to look at these images. How can an entire place, like a refugee camp, as known as Jabaliyah, 20 residences were flattened with a 600-pound bomb for them to go after one supposed commander they don't even know they got? 500 people were killed. How in this any right mind or sense is it excusable? The example was given by one of the journalists in the Young Turks, speaking to a pro-Zionist individual, asking them that if your mother was taken as a hostage, would you allow the police to then bomb the entire building? The Lewiston shooter that happened in Maine, you remember that? He killed 16 people. Would you allow them to carpet bomb the entirety of Lewiston? Would this make sense to any human being, rational capacity? And you're supposedly the strongest military or 10th largest military or whatever the number is in the entire world, where you cannot target whoever you need to target, but rather kill indiscriminately the entire area. The notion is very clear by a number of people who are in the Zionist government. A number of them have literally said that it is the children's fault. This has literally been mentioned, right? Others have said that we want Nakba, meaning another catastrophe. The foreign minister has been said that we want to annex or occupy Gaza in and of itself. And Netanyahu has recently announced that they will have indefinite control over Gaza until the Secretary of this country, Blinken, announced that we will not allow the territory to be taken from the Palestinians. So now there's a disagreement about what happens to these people. Other than the disagreement is not, you will not allow them to kill indiscriminately the civilians. And this is why I will let anybody who calls us anti-Semites after all of this as well, I will let the Jews speak for themselves. Retired Israeli General Amir Levine spoke in Khan Radio in Israel. He referred to the total apartheid in occupied West Bank. 56 years, there's no democracy there. There's total apartheid. The IDF, which is being forced to enact the governance there, is rotting from within. It is standing from the sidelines looking at the Southern hooligans and is beginning to become an accomplice to war crimes. 750 Jews wrote a letter to United States Jews within themselves to call out against the apartheid and demand U.S. leaders restrict American military aid from being used in the occupied Palestinian territories and end Israeli impunity in the UN and other international organizations. Rabbi Alyssa Weiss, she says, we all must be crystal clear that Israel and Zionism are not the same as Jews and Judaism. Any blurring of the lines must be called out swiftly and forcefully. There's no place for anti-Semitism in our movements for justice. We must keep each other safe. One of the craziest things in all of this is that Arabs are also Semites. So if you're anti-Semitic, how can you be anti-Semitic against your own self? So anti-Jewish rhetoric, there's no place for that in Islam. We're not allowed as Muslims to call upon the death and destruction generally upon all Christians and all. This is not, it's haram, it's not allowed by Islamic injunction. But rather against oppression, and those who commit oppression is what our faith calls out against. So hence why Zionism is never equal to Judaism. And we've mentioned over 4 or 5 times in history, including when Russia was pogroming and mass murdering Jews. Who were the ones that welcomed them into Palestine even though while they were Zionists? It was the Muslims. They allowed them to even buy the land. It was the Muslims. And we already mentioned the other examples. To the extent, one of the craziest examples of Jewish refuge in Muslim lands was the great Algerian freedom fighter Abdul Hamid ibn Badis. While they're fighting freedom against French colonialism, he writes to one of his successors, Tayyib al-Uqbi, issuing a fatwa against killing of any Jews and forbade taking over their possessions and giving them refuge while they're fighting colonialism. This is absolutely crazy. I didn't even expect this. But even the Muslims, while they're fighting colonialism, giving refuge to the Jews. Muslims, of course, who saved Jews from the Holocaust, and a number. Over 70 were recognized by the Holocaust Museum. 70 families, and en masse, many of the Bosnians. Dr. Jill Stein, who was a former presidential candidate, she says, as a Jew who grew up after the Holocaust, with relatives who fled pogroms, and a grandfather named Israel, I take never again seriously, and that means never again for anyone. Never again is now. We must put an immediate stop to this genocide. Sister Arnessa Costura, who's a genocide specialist, says that I'm not saying it's a genocide, neither are you saying it's a genocide. The Lemkin Institute, who was founded by a Polish Jewish lawyer, coined the term genocide, are the ones calling this a genocide. So the Institute of Genocide is saying that this is a genocide. And of course, Congressman Cory Bush and many of the congressmen and women who essentially speak out against the genocide that's happening. We end with the following, which is the last picture on the slide. This literally is the second Nakba. If you don't know what's going to happen, they are trying to aim to displace the 1.5 million already in trying to displace all 2.2 million from Gaza. In 1948, 700,000 in all of Palestine, 750 to 80,000 in all of Palestine were displaced. 15,000 in all of Palestine were killed. You have now almost 11,000 dead in the span of less than a month. And 2.2 million people trying to be displaced, 1.546 already displaced. The whole point is to annex it even further. And this is what I refer to as, and many others have referred to as well, as the second Nakba. This is the second catastrophe, where this many children and this many people and this many civilians have been indiscriminately killed. And the world watches after they said, never again to the Holocaust. This is a true catastrophe. So one thing that I will end off and leave with is on the note that, alhamdulillah, as you saw through this presentation, our ummah has gone through a lot worse even. And they've gone through it. And the people of Gaza give us a message. And that message is from a sister who powerfully said the following words. She said that if you were to see and open the skies of Gaza now, you would see angels flocking to take the wings of those who were martyrs, from the innocent civilians and those who fought and for their lives to live there. Literally their existence was resistance. And she said that you would see a sweet smell that you could only smell and know that this is a smell from the people of paradise. And she spoke about also a message to all of us, inshallah, in terms of what we should do as individuals. She says, if Allah lifted the veil for you just 10 minutes and you could see the sky of Palestine, you would see a sight of wonder. Waves of angelic racing to ascend with the souls of the martyrs to Allah in a special celebration. I swear by Allah, besides whom there is no God but Him, the sky is filled with the scent of perfume. These people have completed their test in this world, so there's no need for them to stay in this world. Allah has chosen for them paradise. You see the painful images, don't you? But my messenger and your messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, swore by Allah that the martyr will not experience pain except that of a pinch. So just as if I pinch you by the hand, do not fear for them. As we know, the shuhada are the one the Prophet said, if a building collapses on that person, they're a shaheed. The woman who dies in childbirth is a shaheed. The one who dies in a battlefield is a shaheed. The one that dies in fire or in severe pain is a shaheed. The one who dies of a stomach ailment is a shaheed. These are all different martyrs. So just as if I pinch you by the hand, do not fear for them. I know you are sad, and so remember that the Messenger ﷺ has said, no one in this world dies and wishes to return to the world except the martyr. The martyr wishes that they would die for his sake 1,000 times, to keep dying for his sake and come back. I am now seeing things in Gaza that if you saw them with your own eyes, you would die of joy. These martyrs are alive and eternally provided for by the Sustainer, your sister from Gaza. So if they have the level of hope that they do, where an American nurse by the name of Amanda goes there and says, if I had one fraction of the strength of faith like these people, I would die a happy person. Then how can we not? But of course we're paid. And of course that means that we must have measured response. Politically, socially, relief, in every capacity that we possibly can, because our tax dollars are paying for all of this. 1/1,000,000th or 1/10,000,000th of a percentile of what we're paying is on those bombs being dropped on their heads. So it's a fard ayn. It's an individual obligation for us to do as best as we can to speak out against this, to petition our government officials to change the policy of this country, and to speak in every possible way to educate people. Do you know the vast majority of Americans don't know anything about this, don't know the history of this? They think it happened since October, it happened since last year, happened since 10 years ago. It didn't even happen since 1967. This didn't even happen in 1948. You already saw the history of it. Beyond that. And this is why, you know what's interesting? On one of these websites, which speaks to telling Zionist supporters talking points, you know what they say? Do not engage in Israeli-Palestinian history because we will not win that battle. I promise you. So the only thing that we have is our history. The only thing that we have is to open the eyes of people who have consciousness and humanity, is that this is not something that's new. And that these people have been oppressed. They're the children of those who have been oppressed. So just like the plot of Pharaoh was ruined and the people who seemingly were helpless against a superpower, this also will go. Inshallah. We're just people who are going to be part of those who give them victory, inshallah. One of the most interesting things in the Quran, I'll end with this. Allah says, Fir'aun and Haman and Qarun were the ones that caused the people of Bani Israel all of this torment. Fir'aun was the actual oppressor. Haman was the military leader. You know who Qarun was? Qarun was from Bani Israel. He was from the people that were being subjugated. He was paid off, he was sold out, and he's the one that was given promises of leadership and power and all of this to subjugate the rest. The Muslim Ummah is not dead. Look at the Muslim world and what they're praying and how much dua they're making and how much they would, give in relief and everything that they possibly could. It is the Muslim world's leaders that are fettering and shackling this Ummah. And you know now why. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us leaders that represent this Ummah, Ya Rabbil Alameen. May Allah allow us to decolonize from all of this craziness and allow the Muslim world to awaken. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring justice. May Allah bring justice. May Allah Azza wa Jal allow us to be mechanisms of that justice. And if we don't, May Allah allow us to see our children see that day when Masjid al-Aqsa will be free and the people of Palestine will be free, and that land will go back to 1300 years where everyone lived equally. We will teach the world what it was like, because now they're failing. And I promise, and I apologize for going 1 minute over. شكر الله لكم جزاكم خيرا.